think we're live.
Cool. So hi to everyone. I've missed the count of different cities and so on and so forth. Do we have an international or an interstate
Yeah, we have a
bunch
lot.
here?
We have Massachusetts, Nevada, Greece, Mexico City, Oklahoma, Michigan, New York. A few people from Mexico City, South America, Wisconsin, all over the place. So no pressure.
Yeah, someone said hello from England. I'm not sure if we're gonna have a lot of people from the UK because we just our lockdown just got lifted, and today is the first day with a lot of sun. So I think whoever is tuning in from the UK, this is hugely appreciated because there's a lot of things to do now
Awesome.
in the country suddenly.
All right, Max. So let's talk about your background, how you got started in persuasion. And this is a very new topic, I think, for me over the last few years. And I would love to know why you got interested, how you've seen it change your life, and what you're going to sort of teach people in this masterclass.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. So firstly, hi, obviously to everyone, to the best self audience and my audience. And I want to say, Cathryn, that the best self people are super cool, and they've been kind of flooding my Instagram with the reviews of the deck and so on. So you have a very active thinking audience here. So that's amazing. And just kind of a few words on me. I'm originally from Ukraine, moved to the UK 10 years ago. And then I've kind of gone on to do a bunch of things, went to law school, worked a little bit in intellectual property law, and then became well, I guess some would say sold out and became a corporate consultant at a large consultancy firm. So there I was working on kind of thought leadership stuff, media stuff, and also advertising. And that's where I kind of discovered the social media thing and started a podcast about artificial intelligence that had 8 listeners, and like no one cared about it aside from my grandma, but I had like the best time. And then after a few months of running that podcast, my sister suggested that I advertise it on TikTok. And I started posting videos on TikTok while still working at the consultancy. And some of them kind of blew up. And I guess here I am. When it comes to persuasion and so on, I think as a kid, I was super interested in psychology, but my parents thought that studying psychology is not something that a good immigrant Ukrainian boy should do, and he should go to law school instead. But that said, I've always been reading about kind of human condition, cognitive condition, and so on. So that's been just a huge interest of mine and an area where like throughout my life I felt like I wasn't doing enough kind of at school and so on. I was very um, just like my character didn't let me get on with people very well, especially people who have like authority. I had huge issues of that type at school, so I was like, okay, I need to figure things out, like I need to make sure to coexist with my fellow humans. And then kind of one day I just like blew up a balloon like this. And then I decided that I will be sharing these like psychology tricks with other people. So then I decided I'm going to say this is a simple persuasion trick. I pop the balloon and then I say the trick. And then suddenly kind of it started working, which I didn't expect. So to everyone listening, I just started to post videos saying like, this is a trick to get exactly what you want. And then suddenly people in the comments were like, whoa, I used this on my parents and I got an iPhone. Whoa, I used this on my husband and I got a coat. And I was like, whoa, okay, these things actually work.
Yeah,
So that's how that whole thing popped off. Hope that
that's
makes sense.
awesome. So let's go over what is persuasion, because I know at the start of when you started posting TikToks, you got some backlash on from people of, okay, there's a fine line between being persuasive and being manipulative, and we always want to use these forces for good. So let's talk about like what is persuasion and how do you make it so that you're not becoming manipulative?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a fine line. And actually, some of my tricks were framed. This is a technique that can be used against you, like, for example, gaslighting. So, like, I never suggested to use it. I said,
Yeah,
this is something that other people use. Just make sure to be aware of it. But I think, like, persuasion kind of needs a rebrand. And obviously, the deck is called, it's somewhere here, the deck is called the Persuasion Deck. Um, yeah, so I mean I like this word. I don't think it's inherently evil, but yeah, for some of my videos I got comments saying like I mean stuff like like ex toxic partner used to do this to me, and it's like, correct, this can be done in a bad way, but like we're not going around and saying that the cars are bad because some people don't know how to drive. So it's like, to me, persuasion is just about, persuasion is just about kind of navigating life easier and like collaborating easier. Because like if you look around and see what we've built, like I'm just looking at London kind of skyline and so on, and all of these things that I have no idea how they work, like all of them were built in some form of collaboration of
Mhm.
like team people coming together, ideas. So it's like persuasion is nothing bad. It's just how to navigate life. I don't know, Cathryn, and you, if you have this, the same opinion or
Oh,
different.
I completely have the same opinion. It's not something that I really um, considered as a skill until I was reading books, and I'm reading about all of these mental models around persuasion. And persuasion is really about creating a win-win for both people. It's not about getting what you want and someone else not doing as well. It's and in business, like you have to be persuasive, you have to negotiate a lot, you have to make it a win-win, you have to sell yourself. And so a lot of that is just learning the skills of persuasion, whether it's a business, whether it's a partnership. It's all, everything in life is a negotiation, and if you learn how to persuade people, you can make deals and make things happen without anyone feeling put out or taken advantage on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the whole idea of win-win is super attractive, and I think I used to be quite skeptical about it, especially kind of a few years back. Like I thought that this term win-win wasn't actually, like, it can't happen that it's a win-win for both parties, especially if it's a commercial negotiation. Like surely there is
Yeah,
something there, but I think I've come to realize that, like, like life is long, and if you are being a bad person, like sooner or later
yeah,
things are going to catch up. And I'm not saying that it's karma or anything. It's just like statistical probability. Like people don't like bad people.
yeah,
And I think to do anything well, like you have to get along with people. And if you suck, then like people will call you out for it. So I think that win-win definitely exists. Maybe it's not always like an equal weight of the win. So
mhm,
I think it's more often it's like win and like optimal outcome rather than
yeah.
win-win. Um, but yeah,
I think sometimes leaving a little on the table for future, for building a future relationship is also so part of being persuasive. It's like, compound interest in relationships, like everything in life I feel benefits when it compounds, and that's money, that's relationships,
mm,
that's your work. So being persuasive and being a persuasive person also means having good intent. And if you do that and
yeah,
you're not always trying to get the most or the best, that will carry on, and you'll do better in life. So let's
yeah.
jump to some of lessons you've had in specifically, like let's talk about some specific ways you've won with being persuasive, and then shortly we'll go over some specific things within the deck and why we
Mhm.
created it like that, and things that you can use today to get a yes.
Yeah, just on this, like talking about life situations, it reminded me of, what you just said about like leaving some on the table. And there are kind of a few tricks in the deck that kind of help you do that. So it's like do a big favor, like do a small favor and before a big favor, like that type of stuff that we'll go into later. But it's like I remember when I was working in corporate and I was doing a lot of free work for like other departments. My dad thought that I was stupid, and it's just like talking about different upbringing. Like my dad's incredibly smart, but for him also being kind of old school, like Soviet dude, like he just thinks in different terms. And he was just like, are you getting paid for this? Like I'm like, no, but see, eventually like this will work. I really like the
Yeah,
people and I think that there is something there. So like for 4 months at working at the consultancy, I was doing advertising work for free. uh Not because I was thinking, oh, eventually I will get some win from it, but just because I felt good about it and I knew that yes, down the line there will be something there for me. And that's exactly kind of how it turned out. Yeah,
yeah.
Renee Castle saying you invest in relationships, something like that, I guess.
People generally like helping people, like it makes them feel good. And so when I was first getting started in entrepreneurship, I was super insecure about skills and wanting to learn and almost like prove myself that I was supposed to be there. But what that turned into is like doing work for free, or like showing up, more than maybe was expected because I'm not getting paid. But in the end, later you build up relationships. And then when you do need something, you've just been making these deposits in a bank account that you have never took anything out of. And that's a way of persuasion. So it's reciprocity and building this bank account of social credit over time, so that when you come and ask for something, people are like, oh yeah, for sure, and they want to help you.
Yeah, and then like if you are a Jedi, then you will never have to cash in on any of the chips. Like that's the best. When you do those things, then you never actually come back and ask.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if you have. Do you have like persuasion stories, kind of to share? Persuasion chronicles
Persuasion
or
Chronicles.
anything like that?
Yeah, so I think with me it was more, I didn't know it was persuasion at the time. It was more this active reciprocity. So whether it was with customers or with employees, it's like, okay, how do I just keep showing appreciation and not sort of trying to get, okay, a customer comes through the door, they buy once, and then I don't think about them. One of the things with building a business is you don't want to have to keep getting customers, new ones all the time. So it's like, how do you create that long-term value for someone? And I think it was thinking long-term instead of thinking them as like a customer. It's like, okay, these are a long-term person that I want to invest into, which might in the beginning look like a little too much work or a little too much whatever it looked like. But in the end, I'm like, more people will recognize that than not understand that, and they'll stay longer. So I think just in like building businesses and building personal relationships, that's helped me a lot more than I thought. And just like giving people wins, or also just giving people credit for helping you, and that makes them feel good and will help you more in the long term. And so I didn't actually know until we started working together, and I read Influence a few years ago. So I knew some of the principles he talked about, and then but I didn't understand like the day-to-day things that I was doing that were actually persuasion. I just didn't know what they were called. And so when we were working on this deck together, there was like, it's like simple tricks that you can do that are persuasion that I didn't even know that was what it was. But I'm like, oh, I've been doing this and I didn't know why, but I could see the effect of it.
So that's kind of, I guess, persuasion in business and careers, and that's what a lot of people on the call probably be quite interested in. But what is your take on persuasion in other areas of life, like relationships, family, friendships, and so on? Because I think, like, again, talking about my parents, because I was able to see them because of lockdown restrictions being lifted. But I visited my family and I gave the deck to my dad, and then he started reading the tricks, and then it turned out that my mom basically used half of them throughout the life, and like he didn't even know about it. And it's like, you're using these all the time. This one you use all the time. And she's like, yeah, yeah. But then there was no like, it wasn't like he didn't think that she was manipulating him or anything like that. But I wonder what's your take on, like, these things work in business, right? And I think people understand that, like, this is hugely beneficial and completely good faith. If you take that and put it in relationships, do you think that works in the same way, or are there any nuances that you have to be aware of?
I mean, there's definitely nuances, but I remember specifically my dad laughs at this now, but I wanted this phone from my dad for like, I don't know, I was like 14 or something. And it was a phone that was like, had all these bells and whistles that weren't necessary. But so his first response is like, no, this is no. And so then I created this whole PowerPoint presentation of like why this phone was crucial to, I had an eBay business at the time, and I was like, this is how it will make me more efficient. And I think just the act of like putting it all together is like, I mean, and then I ended up getting the phone because I put that work in. But that first no was like, okay, I have to do more in it to get this phone. So there's like things like that where I also painted it. I don't even remember what I said. I should ask him if he still has it because I printed it off. If he still, like, I was saying, okay, this phone will help me. It will actually be helpful to you for these reasons. So I'm selling him on how this phone that he's going to buy me is actually good for him. God knows what I wrote at the time, but it worked. So it's really like, how do you frame things in a way that's for you're sharing the benefits for the other person? Because people, I always say, like, people listen to We FM. Everyone in the world listens to the same radio station, which is what's in it for me. And so whenever you're trying to sell or get a yes or do something, it's like you have to show them what they're going to get out of it, because they don't care what you're going to get out of it. And so I think learning that and learning how to frame things in a way that is helpful for the other person. So sometimes my fiance will be like, oh, can you read this email? And I'm reading it. I'm like, okay, this is all about you. You need to make it about them. And so that's something I learned in like persuasion, is like, people don't care about you. They're like, what am I going to get from this? And so you have to reframe things that are going to be win-win for both people, but you have to sell it to them. Like, what's the benefit to them?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, that's when I was talking about the kind of my social media journey very, very early on. The reason why I started the podcast was actually for networking. And then again, I think it's also in one of the tricks, like if you organize the environment and you are in charge of the environment and the person comes into your environment, then who you are outside of that environment doesn't really matter anymore. Because I remember like I would have guests like chief economist of this and like Nick Bostrom, like people who are kind of super renowned. But at the same time, like it is my podcast. So even though I'm a nobody, just the fact that I started the podcast, I sent the invite and they came to me, they completely changed the power relationship and just kind of negated any asymmetry in that way. So it's also like for anyone listening who's thinking about like if when you are in charge of logistics, like things change a lot.
Yeah, I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about this idea of becoming a connector. And so
Mm,
becoming the hub for people to meet will have you be in a similar standing to people that you've never met. So for example, in New York, a friend and I used to do these like co-hosted dinners. So he came into town and I was like, okay, you invite two people to dinner, I'll invite two people to dinner, and then we'll co-host this dinner. And it's a way to like get to know people. And because you're hosting it and
mhm.
you're dealing with the logistics, it helps you in relationships. Another thing I like to do sometimes is I will go on Groupon and I'll buy an escape room for like 10 people or whatever, however, back in the day we could get 10 people in the
Mhm.
same place. But, and then I would just invite, I would just do, I don't have any idea when I'm going to use it. I'll just be like, okay, let me do it next month and I'll invite these people. And just the act of like making a reservation and getting people together has people feeling like, oh, I don't have to do the work, but I get to enjoy this. And so that's also a
Mhm.
way of persuasion through like social networking in a way that doesn't feel like that.
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of goes back to like high school, right? It's like even if the nerdiest kid who isn't necessarily like, I mean, an American version would be like the quarterback or something. I don't know who's
Yeah.
popular in the US, but yeah, um, like if he or she throws a party in their place, like suddenly they're kind of cool and like people start to mingle with them, and there is nothing bad about it. So I think the same kind of logic works in the digital space still. And then kind of going back to like persuasion, like is it good or bad, etc. It's just like being equipped. For example, when you ask someone a question, you would want for the sentence to be grammatically correct. And it's like, you don't have to. You can just be
Yeah.
like, blah, 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 and like hope for them to understand. But if you ask it in a way that's like grammatically correct, you smile, like that puts you in a better position to succeed. So it's like just using these tricks is just the next kind of step to take.
Yeah.
It's not like I wasn't trying to create like Robert Greene 48 laws of power, think like,
Yeah.
oh, like be a lot with a person then disappear, they will miss you and be mystically drawn to you, which like can work, but it's more like simple stuff, like for example the trick of like say thank you instead of sorry,
Yeah.
like just simple stuff. And it's like it's not rude, thank you is still a very polite word, but it changes so much. um
Yeah. So
so
the
yes.
idea is, instead of, if you're running late, you show up, sometimes you're like, oh, sorry, I'm late. You would say, thank you for being patient, because the sorry, I'm late is like a negative. Whereas the thank you for being patient is you're like complimenting them, setting yourself off on a good foot. And they were like, I am patient. So that's
Yeah, exactly,
just
exactly.
a very simple like flip of how you can think about it. And before we jump into some specific tricks of persuasion, I also wanted to share, like, these skills that we're talking about is not something that we learn at school, or we learn like a bunch of random history facts that we could look up online now, a bunch of random dates like trigonometry, all the stuff that like actually in life doesn't help us. But one of the things that will have you succeed is these type of things, because people like to work with people that they like. And so if you don't have these soft
Mhm.
skills and like persuasion skills and to be able to sell people on your idea, and you're just the smartest person in the room that can't have a conversation, it doesn't matter how smart you are, people will want to work with people that they like. And so these type of skills, while they seem kind of soft skills, are actually really important to succeeding.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually had just yesterday someone sent me, I get so much like interest in so many interesting insights through my Instagram DMs, but someone said that like, oh, will soft skills make me soft? Because we were talking about the deck, and there is this dude who sells socks online. Who's like very successful, and he was saying, "Oh, these like soft skills, I just want to be like a hard ass and stuff." And it's like if that's your personality, that's cool. So when we talk about soft skills, like you don't have to suddenly become a people pleaser and be like, hee, oh yeah, everyone's happy. It's like, okay, if you are on the direct, like straightforward side and that's like your thing, it doesn't mean that you can't like use these tricks, so you can't develop soft skills. Like it has nothing to do with your personality. Like
Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't mean, or if you're on the shy side, it doesn't mean that you suddenly become this manipulative, cold, like James Bond villain. So it's not about personality. It's mostly just about communication and the way other people like perceive you.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's a way to change, make sure the perception of you is how you want instead of what they decide in their head.
yeah, yeah, and also like just to for I see some people in the chat saying they've already bought the deck. That's great. And to everyone who is gonna buy the deck, like it doesn't mean that you shouldn't work on your like actual skills. So it's like you still, so these persuasion tricks are more like your like dressing and like side dishes and things just to make sure that your actual steak like is good and is digestible and looks nice, but you still have to like have the steak. So
Right.
I'm not trying to say that like without knowing anything about digital marketing, but just using this deck, you can get exactly what you want. Like that's not what I mean. It's just that once you have the base skills, like it just puts you in a better position. Yeah, or if you're a really bad person and a bad partner, it doesn't mean that you will get like an amazing partner just because you say thank you instead of sorry. Like obviously, I don't mean that.
Yeah, your actions have to follow your words. So let's jump into some specific tricks so that people can watch
Yeah,
or learn these day-to-day things, so it's more concrete. And we'll talk about some of the tricks and then also how you've used them and what the result was.
yeah. By the way, before we go into that, just to anyone wondering if you're like, oh, what is this deck? This is the deck. That's how it looks. It has 33 tricks, and the little things here are supposed to kind of represent things that are associated with me. And we actually spent an uncomfortable amount of time uh, figuring out like how to draw these icons. Like it's crazy how much work goes into something so small.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but basically there is a brain. Supposedly I have a brain and so on. The
Glasses.
glasses, balloon, uh, and a book, and like a little comment section icon
Yeah.
for like social media. Um, right, so this, you open it, and then that's how it looks. Like super cool. I actually haven't. Oh, look at the first one. Thank you instead of sorry. That's the first one that comes up. On purpose, we haven't scripted this so that I can just choose the one that I feel is cool. And Cathryn, you also don't know which ones I'm gonna pick, so
No, I don't.
we have a little bit of a. Should I pick the ones that work best, or the ones that are a little bit controversial?
Let's do a
Or
mix.
both? Okay, yeah, this is actually one of my favorite ones, and it works really well. I'm not sure if it's controversial, but this one's called the Benjamin Franklin effect, attributed to
Benjamin.
and the yes, and the trick goes as follows: you have to ask a person for a tiny favor to make them like you before asking for a big one. For example, and the examples are the ones that we give here. For example, pass me the tissue, please. For example, what's the Wi-Fi password? And this so-called Benjamin Franklin effect is a cognitive bias that causes people to like someone more after they do that person a favor. So the whole idea of the Benjamin Franklin effect is like once a person has done even a tiny favor for you, then they feel more inclined to do that again and again and again. So do a bigger favor for you because they feel that they are already invested in this relationship in some way, even if it's something hyper small, like can you pass me the salt before you pitch, like that type of stuff. What are your thoughts, Catherine?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think uh, just getting these tiny yeses. I don't know if you've seen the doc. It's like a documentary or something called The Push on Netflix, and it's all about persuasion and these tiny little consent, you're getting consent, these tiny little things over time, which leads to something much bigger. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's just this idea of getting to yes, and these tiny yeses will lead to a bigger yes, because people don't really like to say no, especially if they've already said yes. So that's a good way for them to both feel that they did something for you, and for them to like you a little more, because people generally like people if they can help them, even if it's a tiny thing.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And then again, just to the way you apply this trick, it's not like you ask for a tissue and then you ask for $1 million. Like, it's not gonna work like that. And also, like, don't rely on this as your like only kind of pitch strategy, obviously. But it's just again those like small things, as you said, small bits that you do that just increase your kind of likelihood of success.
And someone's
Um,
mentioning that it's called consistency bias. So it's just this
mm,
idea of people generally like to be consistent. And so if they say yes once to a little thing, they like to be consistent and um, continue that idea.
yeah. All right, let's do another one. This one is called preemptive gratitude. And it's just kind of a fancy way of saying thank a person for doing something before they agree to it. So, for example, to your partner, you can say thank you for taking out the garbage or the rubbish if you're in the UK. And then again, this is just something again super small that if you don't use correctly can get super annoying. So it's like one of those that you have to be careful to confidently not be like, oh, thank you for buying the deck. It's like, okay, it's a little bit too much, even though I do it still. So it's again the one that you have to use in a quite like tacit way. But I think the one that works also wonders.
Yeah, but be careful with it, because at some point it's like, if you ask for thank you for taking out the trash, thank you for emptying the dishwasher, it's gonna get to the point where like, dude, I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to say explain more of this. Let me see if there's explanation on the thing itself. So the trick works because the other first person feel like they owe you that favor. So it's just kind of a simple trick in a sense that once you've already said thank you to that person for something, they feel like if they don't do it, then that gratitude was misplaced. So it's easier for them to just kind of do it because they already got the gratitude. So it's kind of quite again it can get quite annoying if you don't use it correctly. So can the next one that kind of contradicts in a way the Benjamin Franklin effect, but not really. And this is the door in the face technique that is kind of quite famous. So you want to ask a person for something huge that they're likely to say no to before asking for what you really want. And then again, it's like the point that you made, people don't like saying no a few times in a row. So like a lot of people say, wait, didn't you say to ask for something small before asking for something bigger? It's like, yes, you can do that. Another way of doing it in other circumstances, ask for something big. That's also an element of anchoring, I guess, when it comes to like price and so on, before asking for what you really want. So again, for a lot of people, especially of the younger generation, it worked for asking their parents for the phone because they asked for the laptop first, then the parents said no. Then they asked for the phone, and they got the phone. I mean, I use it in a kind of commercial setting quite a bit, but just in a slightly different way. Because obviously, if it's a commercial setting, you don't want to go crazy and be like, okay, this would be $100,000.
Yeah.
And then they're like, what about 1,000? You're like, okay, 2,000.
Yeah.
Then people will be like,
Well,
okay, you don't know
I'll
what
share
you're
a
talking
way that
about.
I've used this exact thing and it worked really well. So with our manufacturers, I wanted to get better terms with them. So we were on like 60-day terms, and my goal was getting to 90, but I didn't ask for 90. I asked for 120 because I was thinking, okay, they'll say no to that, and then when I ask for 90, then we'll compromise at the number that I actually planned the whole time, and it worked great because they said no, I can't do that, and then like, okay, well, let's compromise and do this, and they said yes, because I took it so well that they weren't going to do the 120, that we landed at 90, which is what I wanted. So that's kind of a way you could do it also.
Mm-hmm. What, Cathryn, when it comes to numbers, do you prefer saying the number first, or do you want the other party to say the number and then you adjust? What is your kind of go-to strategy?
So I have always find it's helpful to get the other person's number first.
Mm-hmm.
With this specific example with the lead time, or sorry, the payment terms, that was something I brought up because, there's no incentive for them to change the better terms that they had. So it was me being like, okay, here's some reasons and this is what I want. And then them coming back to me and saying no, but and then we compromise at the number that I got. So it depends on like where the incentives lie on who puts the number out first. And then but yeah, if I do have to put a number out first, I put a number much more agreeable to what I want, with the idea of going, I think there's the never split the difference idea of, you set the price that you would be willing to go to, and then you drop it by like 50%. And then you're working your way up to the number that you actually are happy with, but you don't start there, because when you start there, people think you can go higher.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember kind of very early on when I wasn't used to this whole social media thing. I thought, okay, so like this master persuader, I'm gonna say the number first, then they go down, blah blah blah. And I remember there was this glasses manufacturer, and it was my first brand deal, and I said, okay, I want £1,000, and they were like, okay, cool. I'm like, I should have asked for something. And then it was just like this thing with when it comes to like giving the first offer, just like make sure you're not underselling yourself. Like I would rather err on the high side and be a little bit like too much than kind of just hit their minimum expenditure.
Well, I've also been there where if someone agrees to the first thing, I'm like, oh, I didn't ask for enough, because there was no negotiation. So they were obviously expecting something higher that they could just say yes right away.
Yeah. Whereas I feel that it kind of changes when you know a little bit more about the market. So I think when both of you have good information, sometimes it just works. It's like this much, okay. Sorry, we're gonna say another one.
Another sort of idea around pricing and money is, I've used this term, I think it was in Never Split the Difference, is when you're very specific with a number, people assume that there's a reason behind it, even if there's not. So I'll say, I need to get this for 382 or whatever, but it's very specific. It's never round numbers. And for you to be so specific, people will assume it's based on something when it's not. And so that gets people to be like, oh, it's like you're working off a budget and you need this, like, I need to get it at this price because of what, and you don't say anything else. You just say, this is the price that I need to get it to. And that works probably better than anything, because you're so specific, they make the assumption in their head it's based on something that they don't know, and it's not.
What if they ask you to show the cost in, or like how you react to that number? Has that ever happened?
Never happened.
How would you react if you would just try to?
Yeah, well, it's like you're just saying, I'm working with these numbers, and I want to see if we can get it at this price. And they've never been like, what numbers? It's just like that I have some imaginary budget that this is all based on, that they are just assuming I have based it on something. And that's actually in this book, Never Split the Difference, is specificity in numbers gets people thinking that it's based on something, even if it's not. So when you go round numbers like 15, 20, if you went, I need to get this for $17.84. Why? They're like, okay, it's based on it. So, and then they work with you on that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do we have time for more, or should we jump to questions?
We have time. Let's do a couple more from the deck, and then we'll jump into questions. So if anyone is watching and has specific questions that we can help you with, make sure you drop them in the chat.
Yeah, I really like these icons every time I look at them. Oh, this one is actually that caused some heat. It's called Because, and a good number of studies show that you would be better off if you use the word because when asking for a favor, even if your rationale isn't like something amazing. So it's like, regardless of the reason you come up with, including the word because makes your request feel more rational. So it's like the examples are, again, like I would like to get this, or I think this would be a great investment because, or can I skip the queue, for example, when it comes to like, I don't know, airport, like, can I just jump in front of you because I'm late for the flight? Like, it's assumed, but just science shows that just if you use that word, then people feel that there is much more punch and much more rationale to the request that you have. And it's also, I think, something that works. Like I certainly use it. It doesn't have to be because as a word, although it helps. It's just like just that follow-up sentence explaining why the
Yeah.
other person should do it.
Yeah, there was a specific study on jumping a line, and it was like, hi, can I jump the line because I need to jump the line, or I have somewhere to be, or
Mhm.
like, so it's like, well, I also have somewhere to be, but yes, you can jump the line. And I've used this in airports when I run lit, and more than not, it works most of the time because people want to help people, and giving them like a reason, even if it's a non-reason, is enough for people to be like, okay.
Yeah, I actually had a similar situation earlier. The thing is, my girlfriend would not let anyone jump the line, no matter if they say because or not. And I'm quite chill, so I like, if you have somewhere to be, like, cool, like I don't have anywhere to be right now, like go on. I don't want to, if you're stressed out, like I'll take the bullet for the team. Whereas, yeah, my girlfriend just there was a situation public transfer. She was just like, no, which was super cold. But there's also, I guess, a cultural difference with jumping the line. Like here in the UK, queuing is like a religion. It's very, very, very ingrained in culture that you need to wait. Whereas where I'm from in Ukraine, it's like whoever is the strongest. So if you have to like body your way through like older ladies to get into the bus, like it's just everyone just thinks it's fair game. And older ladies sometimes are also quite brutal on public transport. Whereas in the UK, people are a little bit more um, well behaved. Okay, next one is also actually super interesting. It's called Share a Food, and it's something I think I read in one of the like corporate, like Harvard Business Review or something like this. And it was about client dinners and like how people always take client dinners to these like take clients to these super fancy restaurants where you're really far from each other and you like have like two different plates that are like 1 meter apart. Um, but there are some studies that shows that once you share food with a person in a like very physical way, then they're more likely to like you, more likely to do favors for you, more likely to basically be persuaded to do something with you. And according to that study, pizza works best because the good feelings that are associated with the food are proven to enhance one's mood, which makes them more receptive to cooperate with you. So pizza seems to be the natural choice because it's like this food made for sharing, but it can work with chips, it can work with anything else. So like when it comes to taking clients out,
Mm-hmm.
and I've also tried this before lockdown, and it's really interesting how this works. Like if you just have the sense of like you were sharing this one plate of chips, like next thing you know, you can be sharing like one budget or like one big project.
Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah,
think
I'm not sure in the US how is that dynamic.
I I think the idea behind that is this like tribal sense of like when you share food with someone, you're in the same tribe. And so then it becomes like, well, we're sharing food. Why wouldn't we work on this project
Yeah.
together? And so it's almost like like a shortcut in our operating systems back to like tribal times of sharing food, which builds a trust that was not there before, which is why
Yeah.
a lot of times you have, bringing out clients for dinner and things like that.
Yeah, of course. Now, maybe there has to be an asterisk for some of these tricks about like social distancing and things like that. We didn't know when we just started making the deck
Yeah.
what was going to happen. But yeah, um,
Awesome. Well, I think
yeah,
we can get to questions. Unless you have any last tricks you want to share before we
yeah.
jump in.
No, I just wanted to point out like the way the card itself works. Because again, a friend of mine asked me like, okay, there are all these cards, like how do I use them? And it's at the back of the card, you have the name of the trick, so you can kind of see the one that sticks out for you. And then on the other side here, you have the explanation of like what it is, and then a bit of the rationale on why that works here, how it works or why it works. And then in terms of how you use the deck, you can make it like a monthly challenge. There are 33 tricks, so you can try a trick a day. They can be quite tricky, but you can try to accomplish that. And it's just like to get you comfortable with using these techniques, or you can just kind of pick and choose. So whenever you feel like kind of leveling up, you can either go through the whole deck and like find 10 that work for you or will work best, or just every now and then just pick one and kind of challenge yourself in that way if you're feeling spicy for the day. But you can use it in any. You can even just frame it and put it up on your wall. um, if
Yeah.
you really want to.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of these you can use in a personal context and then also in a business context. And testing them out in different contexts is helpful. Actually, that open loop one you just mentioned, I really like that as like a persuasion thing. It's basically like if I was to say to you, stay tuned to the end of the webinar and we're going to tell you this one persuasion trick that works better than anything. And
You
so
roll them all, yeah.
what I've just done is create an open loop that you in your mind, we have this need to complete in our brain. That's the psychology thing where you're just like, oh, well, now I'll like stick around and see what this is. And so you create these open loops in conversation to keep people engaged because their brain will want to complete or finish, like close that loop in their mind. And it helps with engagement with people.
Yeah, exactly. And I also, I mean, you can see how well that works on social media with like the simplest things. Let's say a glass of water, right? And then you start pouring a glass, like you will watch the video till the end. And then like I saw it, and then the guy was just saying like, look, I'm just gonna pour a glass of water, and you know exactly what's gonna happen. So like the loop, it doesn't even have to be something secret that will be given in the end. It can be something that you can totally expect, but your brain just wants to be like, okay, glass of water and it's full. Okay, awesome. Like, what's next? Um, so yeah, it's crazy how these things work.
Can you share a day-to-day example of the open loop and then we'll jump into questions?
Yeah, I mean, it's something very simple that again my girlfriend really hates when I do is when you start a sentence and then you just pause a little bit. So for example, like I mean, a very simple way to do it is like, you know what what's really been on my mind, and then you just like pretend to be doing another thing. So it's not like you're doing it on purpose. Then you get the person to like over invest in this conversation suddenly. So she could have been just on her phone doing whatever, and suddenly she's like all engaged and like listening. She's like, okay, what is it? And then you close the loop. So it's like a sneaky way of doing it.
Awesome. All right, let's jump into questions. We have someone, I'm just reading from the chat about, I just finished my first of 4 interviews for a big job. At the end of interview 1, the last question was compensation requirement. I said that my 30K more, I said 30K more than my current salary, and that was my minimum. Any advice on how to negotiate later, given we started there?
Negotiate, given we started there in what way? So they've asked for 30K more
Yeah, I
and
think
they
one
got a
thing you
yes, or
a way to negotiate. It's just like you're not just putting 30K out there as like a random number. It could be, when I started this job, I didn't know this skill or this skill or this skill. I've been developing myself and these skills so that I can do X, which will make me key for this role. And that's what, so it's kind of like the because idea. So it's like, I deserve this because, and then you're just giving them the reasoning behind it. So it's not just this arbitrary number that you just decided on. It's based on something, even if it's not based on anything. It's just like you're telling them the reason um, in a way of that, like the idea of because. That's what I would recommend.
yeah, and I mean it can be about your like the skills that, for example, you have learned, but it also can be about the future commitment. So let's say if you have like, I don't know, like quarterly review or something like this, then you can set the targets. You know, let's say the targets for you are X, the average number is X minus 20%, and then you can like very easily point to like that's what I'm looking to do. This is how we'll do it, and that's how much it will make you. Again, going back to like explaining what's there for them. I think something like this can work in an environment that kind of rewards these like um, target based outcomes. But I think like I found that in any salary negotiation or like roles that like let's say corporate roles or like commerce can be consultancy can be like anything really, like you have to make sure that you're making life easier for let's say your manager or like your immediate boss, and like just make sure that it's not about you as much and it's not about what you need and how this will benefit you, but think about who the decision maker is and how you can frame it so that their life will be much easier and they will look much better. Some would say this is like office play, corporate hierarchy, whatever. But I think it's a completely fair way to negotiate.
Yeah. We have a question from Ruby. Says, do you have a general guide for negotiating slash conversing with angry people? Any advice on how to calm them down? So something I think works is when you're just empathizing with them. So you're, if someone's like, I'm really annoyed at this, and you're like, I would be really annoyed also that, and if you get on the same side, you're turning it against you on opposite sides of the table against each other to, you're empathizing with them in a way that like calms them down because they feel like they're being listened to.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of negotiating with angry people, like it really depends on the setting, um, because it's also like you don't want to create, everyone has a certain level of emotional resilience, and let's say if you're close with the person who's angry, if on a certain day your resilience is at 80%, so you can take a little bit to just make sure that they calm down, etc. And there is at like 20, okay, then kind of do um, try to calm them down, empathize with them, understand why they're feeling that way. I think when a person is angry and it's like in this close setting, I think anything but attacking their personality or character. So if it's like if you want to argue against something, don't say that uh, you are rude, for example. Just say that what you're saying is rude. So just because they're already angry, so they're a little bit unstable, like just take that off their character, their personal like sense of themselves, their identity. Like don't attack it. Attack what they do. If you want to push back, so if you don't feel like empathizing, cool. Like Mother Teresa, you want to argue a little bit, cool. Just don't argue against them as a person. Argue against what they're doing, and I think that helps you avoid this like complete shit show.
Yeah. Um, how can I persuade someone in the work interview to give me the job? So I was actually just talking about this to someone the other day, is whenever someone's hiring, if it's the owner of a company, they're like totally, if it's a small company, they have direct ownership in hiring you and making sure you're the right fit. If it's someone that's like a manager in it, all they want to do is look good to their boss. And so whoever they hire is a risk. So if they hire the wrong person, that looks bad on them. And so if you can try to make yourself look like the most risk-free investment possible, and that means like showing examples of what, like a lot of times people go to college and they might learn all the theoretical stuff behind programming, but they don't actually learn how to make something that works. For example, that's just a random thing, but they don't have real life experience. And so if you can show like real life, here's what I've done before, here's my past results, and this is what I would do for you. This is a good idea of basically the burden of proof is on you to prove your case that you should get this job, and knowing that their job could be on the line or the owner is very dedicated to finding the right person so that they can get results. So you basically want to make it as free for them to hire you.
Yeah, and I mean, and also to give a trick of something that I know works, and it actually works like wonders for me. Um, if someone who I'm interviewing would do that, like that would be directly into the agency very quickly. It's like if you ask really good questions and a lot of questions. Now, it doesn't mean that you're always like, oh, what about this? Or like, what does a typical day in your life look like? Like none of that stuff. Like actually do a lot of research, find some kind of pain point, find what that that person cares about, and like frame a really nice, like not necessarily deep but very like worthy question. And if you have like 2 to 3 of those, I think that's amazing. That shows you curiosity, that shows that you're prepared, it sets you apart, it creates a conversation. Just like so many good things um kind of happen
Yeah.
from it. So
I also think if you can show that you have an interest in this besides for a job. So, for example, I just hired a video person, and when we were first met, I could tell, like, even if he wasn't being paid for this is what he'd be doing anyway. And so, if a person's hobby and like what they're interested in is also something that they can get paid to do, then the interests are aligned. If you're asking an introvert to be a salesperson and be on, you're actually having them go against their natural like what they enjoy doing, and so that's not a long-term fit. But if you're asking someone to do a job that they would already do on their spare time, it's like a huge win-win. For example, Rajwan, who designed the deck with us, first day after I hired him, he was like, yeah, I designed this game yesterday. It was a Sunday and we started on a Monday, and he's like, yeah, I just designed this game. I don't know if you would find it useful, but and I'm like, I don't know what to do with that information. But I'd love that you were working and like randomly designing stuff. Like every few months we kind of joke around because he will take a famous company and redesign their logo for no reason because he loves design. And so if you can find someone, if you can prove yourself to be someone that will do this stuff because you're interested in it, it's much easier for them to hire you because there's a personal interest there that will keep your motivation up.
Yeah, and a random tip is when you're doing a phone interview, make sure to find a quiet place.
Yeah.
Because if it's like if you didn't manage to find somewhere quiet, even though this was scheduled 2 weeks in advance, and you're apologizing for the noise, unless it's something like, okay, I understand, like emergency, whatever, cat, child, like that's fine. But if it's just like, yeah, it's noisy, it's like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So you want to avoid any red flags. What are the best free resources to learn about persuasion and psychology?
Obviously, the deck.
That's not free though, but it will pay
Oh, the
for
best
itself.
free. I thought you said 3. Oh, okay. I thought I was gonna say the deck, the deck, the deck. I see. Best free resources. The masterclass. I mean, you already here.
Yeah. I think learning like mental models. So if you just Google that, and like there's specific ones around persuasion, some of which we've talked about here. Just like, and then obviously books, but there's a lot of stuff online you can learn for free. And then you can learn how to persuade people, make more money, and buy the deck.
Yeah, and I mean, look, like I'm also not saying that these are like some kind of secrets that have been protected in the vault, and now you can get them only through the deck. So if you have like a few hundred hours and you're just free, then you can Google all of the tricks and find them and figure out how to do them. So I guess you can do it that way.
Yeah. Let's see the next one. What do you think is the most controversial trick in the deck?
That's a good point. Let me actually see. Like there were a few that the most controversial ones we've actually taken out. So hopefully none of them are kind of like too much. But I think it's like there is one. Actually, this one wasn't controversial, but a lot of people like pushed back on this a lot. And this trick is called nod and smile, and it's about arguments. And there are a lot of studies that show that if you nod and smile in an argument, then that takes off the heat from another person, and they just feel like it's a little bit pointless to do this, and they just want to. They start opening up to the idea of actually listening to you. But a lot of people said like, oh look, like with my parents, no way, or with
Yeah.
my partner, if they are in the heated up moment, and I nod and smile, I'm just flying out of the room. So I guess you have to kind of understand
Yeah.
the
I think
circumstances, but the nod and smile one is the
I
one
think
that people
term
back
for
on.
that is read the room.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joy mentioned influence. So I didn't mention some books because he asked for free, but Influence by Robert Cialdini is a great book on persuasion. These work great during a conversation, but can we also use them in emails or proposals?
Yeah, absolutely. Most of them, I mean, you can't share food through an email yet, but the other kind of language tricks like preemptive gratitude stuff, thank you instead of sorry, I think that all translates quite well. I think the challenge there is the email etiquette is the craziest thing ever. The fact that we still adhere to all of these rules and spaces and like regards, kind regards have two different meanings. Like, I think that in of itself is so crazy that common sense on email just a lot of the times just doesn't work, and we adhere to these rules for no reason. But most of the language stuff I think works over text or email or phone.
Yeah, and I think I don't have any basis for this. My fiance has a very corporate job, and sometimes she's like reads out an email, and I'm like, oh my god, jargon, jargon, jargon. It's like such a corporate speak. Whereas when I'm writing an email and she'll see me and she's like, that's very casual. But I'm like, this works for me. I think something, if you're getting to know someone and you're new in the relationship, is like making them laugh or amused in some way can help break the initial ice between you, because when you do that, people like making someone laugh or be entertained even in a tiny way makes them like you more and break
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of that ice between you. So sometimes if it is suitable, obviously, like making some sort of funny remark in an email has worked well because you're sort of already putting that person on the same level as you, like you're friends already, even though maybe you're not.
Yeah. But then, like, for example, I just had a thought about the say thank you in advance, right? Like that can come off as passive aggressive. Let's say if you are saying this to someone like a little bit below in the food chain or something like this, like this can be this can come off as quite manipulative. Like if it's Friday night and you say thank you for doing this, it's like you shouldn't be doing this because people can have other plans. So it's just, and the whole thing about thank you on email, I think is just like it's just you just say it. It's not about gratitude. It's just the
Yeah.
way you sign off, which is like a nice, polite thing. But I think maybe that trick would not necessarily work that well now that I think about it.
Yeah. Can you review the point you made from Never Split the Difference about starting with your maximum price? Wouldn't that discount you if compared with a lower price? Um, so it depends what side of the negotiation table. Are you buying something that you want for less, or are you selling something? So you come up with a number in your mind of how much you want to buy or sell something. And then depending on, unless you want to pay more for it, uh, if you're buying something, you're like, okay, this is the maximum price that I'll pay, but I might do it 40% less than that as the initial offer, because then we'll negotiate back and forth and then we'll get to what I actually want to pay. But you don't lead with that, because when you lead with that, often people think there's room, and people expect to negotiate a lot of times. So if you create a room for movement there, it works really well. And so something else, Never Split the Difference. So you could go raw numbers, and then when you get closer to the number you actually want, then you use the specific number that I mentioned. And then you could also, to sort of wrap it up, something he talks about is throw in like something that's not money, but something that is somehow valuable, as a way to be like, look, I have no more money to give you, but here's something else. So for example, I used this with my ex-business partner, where we're going back and forth on price. Then we get to a number and I'm like, look, this is it, but I'll also throw in some air miles, credit card points, because that is of value. And it's a way to be like, I'm done, there's no more money coming, but here's something that I can give you of value to as a sign that there's no more money here for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me too. And I have a funny feeling that if I'm not saying everyone should go and do this right now, but if you email like info at best self or whatever, saying, look, I have no money, but if I get your planner or if I get the deck, then we'll post on my Instagram to like, even if you have like no followers, if you frame this correctly and offering something, I'm pretty sure that you have a decent shot at getting something for free.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also honesty. Like people like honesty. Back to the salary negotiation, like we were talking about how you should frame it and stuff. I think a lot of the times, if you say like, "Look, I haven't learned any new skills, but I just split up with my partner, and I'm waiting for there's a court case pending, and I really love this job. I have no, I will work the hardest, but I'm looking for support here." Like there is a room if you are like radically honest in that sense. I think that can take you to places.
Yeah. I also think a lot of times, sometimes in like corporate or business emails, there's this wall between you and like what's actually going on. So for example, last year I was talking to this author and we were potentially going to work on this product, but I'm also going through this business thing buyout that's taking forever. And I was like kind of flaking out because it was just taking up so much of my bandwidth. And when he sent a follow-up email to see where we were at, instead of just trying to be like, okay, you know, make up something, I was like, look, I'm actually, I don't have any bandwidth for this because this is going on. It's taken up way more of my attention than I thought. Um, so I don't want you to think I'm flaky, but this is what's going on. And so what that does, it's like you're being vulnerable, and then you're giving them a reason that's a real reason, instead of having this corporate facade of, I'm working on it or we're behind or whatever. It's just like, look, I have some real nice stuff going on. And that also is a good way to build relationships, because you're kind of saying, this is what's going on. I'm being open, and people generally take that pretty well.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think, this thing about honesty is the best policy, like probably not all of the time. But sometimes I think it works
Yeah.
quite well. Another person,
Go ahead.
Another person to read actually on some of these topics is Daniel Pink. Um, I think he's a psychologist. He has some really interesting, just back to like books and stuff to people who want to read more. He has some interesting stuff on persuasion and things of that nature. And when it comes to how to say no and how to phrase things correctly, I think Essentialism by Greg McKeown has really good points about how to subtract stuff and commitments without making other person feel like garbage or feel like they're not valuable or feel like they're not a priority.
Yeah, great. That's good. Max, when's your birthday? Someone's asking.
Oh, July 27th.
Oh, okay. They're saying we have similar energy. Mine's November 27th. So what is that, like 6 months apart? Whatever that
Yeah,
means.
maybe
Anyone
like
in horoscopes, let us know what that means.
I mean
All right.
I'm not a big astrology guy.
No, me neither.
But yeah.
All right, two more and then we're good. Kate is asking, how do you persuade yourself? I'm not.
Whoa, whoa. Yeah, I mean, again, it kind of depends a little bit. I think with yourself, um, I think what helps is knowing why you do what you do, which is like super bad advice, very hard to figure out. Like, I get it, but like we probably don't have time to probably properly get into this. But I think that what helps me is either when I don't want to do something, creating friction for doing that thing, or when I really want to do something, subtracting friction for doing that thing. So, for example, if you want to go running, prepare your clothes the night before. Make sure that there is nothing that can potentially throw you off. Like everything is ready. If you want, like sleep in your shoes, like I don't know, like you have to check with
Your
the
girlfriend might
GP.
have a
That's a good
problem.
thing to do. And then,
I
yeah,
said your girlfriend might have a problem with that.
probably.
Okay,
My girlfriend actually threw away my shoes the other
I,
day because they were hurting my feet.
I just wrote about this recently, is that whole idea of like changing your environment to align with your goals and your habits that you want, make bad habits harder and make good habits easier. So like as humans, we take the path of least resistance. If the path of least
Yeah,
resistance leads you to doing the habits, then you will do them. Whereas oftentimes we don't really design our environment to align that way. And then another way to do it is like sometimes in the moment something will feel good, but if you're like nothing, like failing at something is not usually one thing, it's a decision that you make over and over again. So if you do something
mhm,
once, it's like, what would this look like if I did this every day? And
yeah.
that's often a good, way to persuade yourself not to be consistent in doing something negative.
Yeah, and I mean, you can think about, for example, like Cathryn and I want you to buy the deck. This is why you can go on, bestself.co/max, and then in one click, the deck is in your basket. It's not in your basket in 7 clicks. You don't have to like type it out and then type in some code and then another code, and then that takes you to a folder that you download. Like, and these social media companies think in the same way. Food delivery companies think in the same way. Like they want to remove friction to make it as quick as possible. Amazon thinks in the same way. So it's like it's for you sometimes to push back. And it's like if it's about Instagram, a simple thing of like, okay, you want to stay on the app, delete it from your phone, but keep it on your browser. So you still get access to most of the features, but it's just not as smooth. And
Yeah.
like they're not investing as much into like browser based like addictive interface. So just small things can actually save a lot of time.
Yeah. So just kind of map out what you want to do and what you don't want to do, and then just add friction. One thing to stop watching as much TV is I would just take the batteries out of the remote. And, now the remote is no longer an accessory to your TV. It's the only way to control it. So if I want to read more and watch less TV, I take the batteries out and I put a book on my coffee table. And that is a good way to add that friction.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly use AirPlay from my phone, so that wouldn't
Oh,
really help.
you just hacked it for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question. How persuasive is it to use facts and statistics?
Oh, super persuasive. There is actually a trick called percentages in the deck that I don't want to can't find right now. But it just shows that if you use percentages, it just makes your argument much stronger. People believe statistics, obviously. I think like there is you can just Google, there's tons of articles of like how exactly to use them. Like is it better to say 50% or half and things of that nature. But if you can throw in a statistic, then that helps. Even in like household conversations, I find that that helps. Like you can
Really?
say
Like
that,
what?
9 times out of 10, this like, well, it's just when I'm thinking about like argument patterns, it's like, there seems to be a disbalance. For example, like I do 70% of like household tasks. It depends a little bit on your partner, but you can say that it feels that it's not, like people say that it feels that it's not 50-50, for example,
Yeah.
all the time. But you can like take it a step further.
Um,
Like,
we've all heard the statistic that it's like, 90% of accidents happen within 5 minutes of your home. And it makes you think,
mm,
oh, that's because I'm by my, it's because like I'm distracted by my house. But then I was talking to a friend, it's like, well, actually, it's just because you're always by your house. So if you're ever gonna have an accident, you're literally always coming there and always coming back. So of course, at some point, like you're more statistically having an accident by your house because you come and go from there so often. But it creates a different dialogue in your head when you first hear it. And when it was only when my friend
hmm
brought that up, I was like, oh, of course. So that's a way that you can sort of use statistics, and people will make assumptions based on them if you wanted to, if you had some sort of thing like that. Not that I would recommend it, but it's something that I learned.
yeah. But I think that also, I think statistics as a persuasion tool perhaps was like a little bit ruined by marketers and governments, as probably any other tool in the history of humankind was ruined by one of those two parties or both of them. I think now what really helps is storytelling. So if you read a book like Making Made to Stick, it's
Mm-hmm.
quite an interesting book about like how to make stories stick. Or there's another book called Contagious that is also interesting about like how ideas spread. So I think now like really smart storytelling, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like something emotional. Just there's a character, something happens, like that stuff. I think also works really well. So, for example, if you're scared of flying, I can tell you that you're more likely to get killed by a coconut walking down the street in Texas than on the airplane. Then you might think like, okay, but I'm still kind of scared of flying. But then if I tell you a story about how when you go through the air and the plane shakes, it's the same way as when you're on a ship and and you're sailing and you feel, you swaying from side to side because it's water, and you're not scared because it's water. So air is in the same way. It also has waves. So when you shake, it's just like a ship going through the water. So sometimes it's maybe better to use other tools.
Yeah, I think nobody's going to be convinced with statistics. It should be like an element of your art or your argument or your persuasion, but storytelling is a much more powerful way to do it, or have teach people, is because you're teaching through a story. And as humans, like we all relate to storytelling. Like when we watch a movie or watch a show, like we're just watching a story, and we're more likely to remember and resonate with something if it's told to us in a way that's like a teaching story, instead of being like, you know, I'm just like, oh, this thing works 30% of the time, and if you do this differently, it's like there's no stickiness to that because
Yeah, yeah.
person to it. So great. Well, I think we're pretty much wrapping up. So we went over some tricks specifically. We went over some books that we'd read and some ways that we use it. So if you're interested in getting all the other tricks, you can go to bestself.co/max and grab the Persuasion Deck, because there's a lot more where that came from.
Yep. So I promise not to do this, but thanks everyone in advance for getting the deck, and send me photos, or send it to Best Self social media account and my social media accounts of like you using it, how you use it. All that stuff is super interesting.
Yeah, I think to tell us a story of how you used it. So it's like if you persuade your boss to, if the person that was getting this job, or you're interviewing, I would love to hear how you use some of these tricks to get paid more, get the job, get your partner to do something, whatever way works for you.
Yep.
Great.
Okay. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, Cathryn. Thanks, guys.